nothing but the truth. Hello, I'm Raj Chengappa from India Today and your host for Nothing But the Truth. After a successful first season, in season 2, we will continue to look every week at key issues of concern and bring you perspectives and clarity as to why these matter to you without holding back on the truth. Every Independence Day, I make it a point to go to the Red Fort in Delhi to listen to the Prime Minister's address. It's a fantastic show with the armed forces blowing their bugles, firing 21 rounds of cannons, whose boom could be heard across central Delhi, and it's a marvelous feeling. The national anthem plays soon after, and helicopters showered flowers on the audience, including me. Then the Prime Minister addresses the nation, as every Prime Minister has done since 1947. It's a great way to feel the pulse of the Indian Republic. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Independence Day address is always inspirational to listen to, given his rare oratorical skills. In his address this year, Prime Minister Modi called the next 24 years as the Amrit Kal, or auspicious period, and urged all of us to collectively work towards transforming India into a developed nation by 2047. So what is a developed nation and why is it important? Let's get to the definition of a developed nation. And generally, it is considered as a country that demonstrates sustainable economic growth and one that has robust and efficient transport and communication infrastructure. Most important, it must have a well-rounded human development index, which must reflect in a uniformly high standard of living with a healthy and well-educated citizenry. Now, developed countries must have a high per capita income, which averages around $20,000. That, if you convert to Indian rupees, is around rupees 16.7 lakh per annum. There are now 37 countries that are identified as developed countries. India's current per capita income of $2,400 or rupees 2 lakh is, if you can look at what developed countries have, is almost 10 times less than what is needed. And therefore, the World Bank, which does these classifications, put us under the lower middle income economies. We are in the same boat as Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan. Now, if you take a look at China, the per capita income of China is $12,800. That's approximately rupees 10.6 lakhs per annum, and that is 6 times that of India. That places China in the upper middle income category, but most importantly, not yet in the league of developed nations. And as I mentioned earlier, what you need is per capita income that is more than $20,000 usually to come under this classification, apart from that infrastructure and everything else that we talked about. Now, what works in India's favor is what Prime Minister Modi has identified in his Independence Day as a trinity of Ds: demography, democracy, and diversity. So, from being the 5th largest economy in the world, the Prime Minister is confident, and he said that in his speech that India will become the 3rd largest before 2030. That's just 7 years from now. In doing so, we will overtake Japan and Germany, but around the same time, China will overtake the US, or is estimated to overtake the US GDP. Currently, the US GDP is around 28 trillion, and China will emerge as the world's largest economy. But as both India and China demonstrate, the sheer size of an economy does not determine its status as a developed country. So China could be number 2 and India number 3, but we need not be developed countries. And for that, the criteria, as we said earlier, has to do with high per capita incomes and high economic growth. So what will it take for India to become a truly developed country when we complete 100 years of independence on August 15th, 2047? That is the question we're going to answer. There is no way we can achieve this exalted status by doing business as usual. Instead, the country will need a revolution in 10 key sectors that India Today magazine has identified in its latest issue. Now, these 10 are: 1, energy; the 2nd, transport; 3rd, communication; 4th, agriculture; 5th, defense; 6th, health; 7th, education; 8th, e-governance; 9th, e-commerce; and computing. What has happened is that, driven by the rapid technological innovations, each of these major fields, each of the 10 that we talked about, have seen dramatic technological innovation and transformation. There has been a quantum leap in computing, communications, and an extraordinary human creativity that have led to a convergence of technological innovations that is making possible what was once considered absolutely impossible. Now, if India does not keep abreast or be adept to these developments, it will be left far, far behind, with exploitation and deprivation becoming its permanent fate. We don't want to get there. So let's start with the first 10 sectors, and let me begin with communications. Believe me, this is not in order of importance. It is just that I'm putting these together, and we will come to understand why each of them are important. Let's take communications, as you said, and here India can take pride in the fact that its average cost of rupees 14 for 1 GB of mobile internet data that you and I use is among the latest or the lowest in the world. Users in the US, in comparison, pay 33 times more, and those in the UK 4.5 times more than what we do in India. Also, to India's credit, we have moved quickly to be in lockstep with advanced technology nations in the introduction of 5G telecom networks, and those of us that live in the metros can see it on our mobile phones, where we are getting possibly 5G network, hopefully that works well. However, the real test will come with the next generation telephony, or 6G. It is designed to be 100 times faster than 5G and will be able to handle enormous amount of data transmission without any latency, which means that there will be no delay. It will be instant, unlike many of the earlier technologies. This will transform, the coming of 6G will transform the way we communicate at work, home, and play. Now, let me just put this simply, just to understand where we go. Despite the fabulous advances in technology that we've had so far, we are still in what is called a 2D interface of communication. The kind that you and I do on Zoom or MS Teams or any of the business apps that is there, that's just 2D, two-dimensional. We have these kind of virtual meetings, but do not get the sense of a shared physical space. The real question is, what happens when you are finally able to make real eye contact and read body language, even as we remain in the virtual domain? You could even do Star Trek. That was an old serial that used to be there, which talked of sci-fi visits to other planets, and there used to be the favorite phrase, beam-me-up-Scotty, which is a kind of a teleporting thing. You could possibly do that with your digital avatar, and if you wanted to visit a factory, for instance, you could inspect it digitally, but they will feel that your presence is there, or if you wanted to try out new clothes at a shop. For all this, you would need what is called three-dimensional communication technology, which is just around the corner, which will happen in the next 4 or 5 years. But the next level is 4D communication technology, which is also in the making. It promises to make life far more comfortable and exciting. And just to give you an example, imagine having 4D maps to help autonomous driverless vehicles, navigating roads or flight paths, ensuring zero collision and the fastest commute. More interesting or exciting is that you could have your own robotic exoskeleton. It will be like a whole body suit like Iron Man has in those movies, which responds to your thoughts. You don't have to press any buttons and uses the power of machines to augment your physical capabilities. To give you a simple example, if you have shaky or trembling hands and you can't hold a glass, your exoskeleton will hold your glass for you so that it does not spill anything. And that's only a simple task. As I said, it can follow far more complex commands. Now, 6G, as I mentioned earlier, also will be guiding autonomous cars, enabling teleporting that we had discussed earlier, and even holograms of yours where you can be physically present in a, at home, but really people can see you virtually as a full person sitting in the meeting. And so this business of combining the physical and the virtual will start getting more and more to happen as we get along. All this will improve what is called our second sector, which we are discussing. The first is communications, is e-governance. Now, if India begins to use 6G technology for digitizing, say, its land records, which, as we know, is a major source of disputes, it's a major source of family disputes as well, and also a source of corruption. If you could provide 4D images of this, it will vastly improve e-governance, and particularly, let's take a look at delivery of public services. This will be considerably enhanced, especially in rural areas where it will be speedier. This will also speed up the third sector that we have to look at, which is e-commerce, which, as you know, is a major engine of growth. I will not dwell more on this because we still have 7 others to go. But for all these things to happen and for India to gain preeminence, there is another critical sector that we have to gain mastery in, which is computing, and that is the fourth sector. Among the technologies India will have to master is quantum computing, which can process information 1,000 times faster than the conventional binary transistors that our laptops have. Such super fast processors will revolutionize areas like banking, health, and defense sectors. Now, India has to do a mission scale effort from both government and industry to acquire another critical area, competence in that, in artificial intelligence. We are all familiar with the prowess of ChatGPT, and it has captured our popular imagination, but that is just the beginning. What is encouraging is that Indian companies are among the world leaders in AI. But one area that we have to acquire mastery is in semiconductor chips, and India urgently needs to develop indigenous competence in that. In short, what we need to build in the next 2 decades is what is known as the powerful Indiaverse. You might have heard of Metaverse, which has now become the name of the Facebook company, but Indiaverse is building this whole eco-structure of communications, computing, and the convergence that happens, and that is very critical. Now let's come to the fifth sector, which is energy. Currently, India imports as much as 85% of its crude oil requirement and spends rupees 13 lakh crore, or close to 4% of its GDP, as it did last year. That's unsustainable, both in terms of financial costs and given the worldwide environmental constraints on the use of fossil fuels. Under the Paris Climate Change Agreement, India has committed to reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by at least 45% by 2030 compared to its 2005 levels. In addition to ensuring that 50% of its cumulative electric power installed capacity will be from non-fossil fuel-based energy resources. So what does that mean? So far, when we say non-fossil fuel-based resources, we have relied on wind, solar power, and biofuels as the main renewable energy sources. But the game changer could come in the form of green hydrogen. India has launched a mission to make the country a global hub for its production, use, and export. Green hydrogen is produced using what we all did in high school, the principle of electrolysis, which employs an electrical current to break down water molecules to hydrogen and oxygen using electrodes. But its costs are currently prohibitive to do so. The good news is that big firms worldwide, including Indian giants like Reliance, Adani, and L&T, are working towards lowering them, and the hope is that it will become as cheap as, say, petrol would be to use in your cars. Which brings us to the sixth sector, which is the transport sector, and that is linked to energy. Here, India will have to master other critical technologies to make that great leap to an advanced economy. And the critical thing is lithium batteries. These are now the best alternative to conventional lead-acid batteries, not only because they charge much faster, but also because they can store higher amounts of energy in a similar volume, thereby lasting much longer before needing recharging. That is the reason why lithium-ion batteries have become the choice for electric vehicles and will soon replace petrol and diesel engines, which have serious carbon emission concerns. Niti Aayog estimates that there will be a 50-fold increase in the domestic demand for advanced chemical cells, battery cells like lithium-ion by the end of this decade. So both for EVs and also for storing on electricity grids, solar and wind power generated electricity. Globally, and that is something that India has to be careful about, China is the big boy of batteries, accounting for 70% of the world's manufacturing capacity of these kind of batteries. So India has to move fast. It has discovered mineable lithium in Kashmir, but has yet and has to master the technology to manufacture such batteries at a commercial level, especially if the goal that is stated by the Modi government is to make 30% of all private cars and 80% of 2- and 3-wheelers totally electric by 2030. The other imperative in transport is high-speed transport to transform mobility in the country. Now, in the railways, for instance, the Vande Bharat trains that the Prime Minister and the Railways Minister inaugurate so regularly can travel at a peak speed of 160 kilometers per hour. Now that's good as compared to the older versions that we had, but in comparison to Japan's Shinkansen or bullet train, that can travel at 320 kilometers per hour or almost twice the speed of our Vande Bharats. Now, with India tying up with Japan for this for a 500-kilometer Mumbai-Ahmedabad rail corridor, the first Indian Shinkansen to roll out in 2027 will cut the time between these two commercial hubs from 7 hours to a mere 2 hours. So India will need many more such high-speed trains, but has to make them indigenously to meet the massive demand for faster rail traffic. When it comes to roads, Nitin Gadkari, the Union Minister for Transport, has done a commendable job of adding over 50,000 kilometers length of highways in the 9 years of the Modi government. However, the daily average of 350 kms that Indian truckers traverse is still half of what their counterparts in the US do or are able to do, which means that if they're able to do 700 kilometers per day, by cutting across the country, we do only 350 kms, which we need to then speed this whole process up, and technology can help us do that by bringing intelligently controlled highways that we should be installing, as well as which will ensure not only avoid traffic snarls, but also give you crash indications and enable the trucks to move faster across the country. The seventh sector that we will focus on is agriculture, which is food, and here Atmanirbharta or self-reliance should be the motto. There cannot be a greater irony than the fact that while the country is the largest producer of pulses in the world, it is also the biggest importer of it. While India has creditably reduced this import dependence from, say, 19% of the total demand to 9% in just one decade, we are still nowhere near meeting the per capita protein requirement of our people. So if we have to meet that, as more and more people get well-to-do, they will need higher amounts of protein. India will need a technological breakthrough in the next decade to achieve a pulses revolution to gain self-sufficiency in this particular pulse production. Likewise, we import 60% of our cooking oil requirement. This is again the highest in the world. We need to make giant strides in boosting our vegetable oil production, even as we keep environmental concerns in mind. And that's critical because we know that as we keep introducing these plants to grow edible oil, especially from other countries, environment is a major concern. So let's now move quickly to the defense sector, which is the eighth sector of our focus. And here we need to also develop self-reliance. The country, as we know, imports more than 60% of its military equipment for its armed forces. And if we are to retain our strategic independence, it is crucial that we push the pedal on indigenously making cutting-edge equipment such as jet engines, which we recently signed up with the US, and lethally armed drones. Both of them are critical because if you know the story of defense, we have not been able to develop a jet engine that could be put onto fighters, and we have to fighter aircraft for Air Force, and we have to import them. That is a critical need to overcome, as well as other things. But let us move quickly to the last two sectors. The ninth sector, which we are going to look at, is among the most critical for India, which is education. Now, we need transformative changes in the education sector if we have to join the high table of developed nations. We may boast of a demographic advantage with over 54% of our population being below the age of 25 years, but that advantage is being undone by the huge skills gap. Let me just give you one study by the UNICEF that showed that by 2030, over 50% of India's youth will lack the necessary skills for employment. Now, this means that our demographic advantage will be completely dissipated, and it is important and imperative that both the union and state governments must take urgent steps to reverse the situation and spend as much as it takes to do for that. What also needs boosting, and probably more even spreading, is what is called STEM education, which STEM standing for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. All of us have heard of it, and that is critical because the demand for STEM jobs rose by 44% in the country between 2016 and 2019 before COVID struck. So that is a very critical imperative that we need to do on education. And finally, the 10th sector, which is equally important, is health. Now, here what we have to focus on is improving the health delivery system to ensure quality, accessibility, and affordable services for the masses, and simultaneously employ or deploy advanced solutions like gene therapy, that is transforming the way we treat cancer, and India requires that kind of technological innovation for it. India also has a huge opportunity to regain self-reliance in manufacturing what is called active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs. This is a key component in any medicine, and we have ceded that lead to China many decades ago. We need to catch up with that, like we need to do with what is called biosimilars, which hold the promise of reducing costs significantly for expensive drugs. Now, these 10 sectors are by no means an exhaustive list of the innovations and reforms that India needs in its quest for first world status. Rather, this is just a roadmap for the country to focus its energies on what can best deliver citizen welfare. As Prime Minister Modi said at his Independence Day speech this year, and I'm quoting him, "The actions we take, the sacrifices we make, the penance we undertake in this era will lead to Sarvajan Hite, Sarvajan Sukh," which means the welfare and happiness of all. There cannot be a nobler aspiration for India at 100. For more details of each of these 10 sectors, please read the latest issue of India Today magazine that has brought out a special issue titled India at 100. Thank you for listening to this episode of Nothing But the Truth. I look forward to having you with me next week. Nothing but the truth.